Welcome everyone to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight we'll be studying verses 37 and 38 of the Dao De Jing. As always, line up to read your favorite translations, and then we will hopefully go to Jason once he logs in, and have him do his translation, and then everybody can share their takeaways. So type exclamation point to share your version of the version of the Dao De Jing that you would like to read this evening. Evanique.
Okay, so mine is God as Nature Sees God, a Christian reading. Number 37. The Tao never acts, yet nothing is left undone. If the governments and leaders would keep it, all things would be of their own accord to be transformed. Should desires arise from transformation, I shall influence them through silent simplicity. Silent simplicity involves being free from desires. When you are without desire, you are content, and all the world is at peace.
Thank you, Evanique. Next up is Brian.
Okay, I'm going to read from Kimura again.
而无不为，侯王若能守之。
I go on?
Yes, please. I'm sorry. I was just looking for who was unmuted there for a moment.
Okay. The Tao does nothing, yet it leaves nothing undone. If the leaders of the world abide by it, all beings of their own accord will transform themselves. If in the course of self-transformation, discordant desires arise, calm them with the unnameable simplicity of the Tao. If calmed with the nameless simplicity of the Tao, discordant desires of their own accord will disappear. If discordant desires disappear and quietude is restored, the world of its own accord will order itself.
Thank you, Brian. And what translation was that?
That was from Yasuhiko Genku Kimura.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and next up we have Marguerite. Marguerite.
Yes. Hi, I will read Bahasa Indonesia. Tao does not work, but there is nothing that Tao is not involved. So, Tao tidak mengerjakan apa-apa, selalu diam. Tapi tak ada semua yang tidak dikerjakan oleh Tao. Jikalau seorang raja dapat memegang pemerintahan negerinya atas dasar Tao, segala sesuatu berjalan dengan baik sewajarnya. Apabila sudah berjalan dengan baik, mereka masih memiliki keinginan untuk bekerja, menyampaikan keinginannya. Kita harus dapat mencegah keinginan itu dengan kesederhanaan dari Tao. Kesederhanaan dari Tao yang sewajarnya akan menyingkirkan keinginan. Dengan menyingkirkan keinginan, maka ketentraman akan mengambil tempatnya, hingga seluruh dunia akan berubah sendirinya menjadi aman dan sentosa. Persamaan dari seluruh manusia hingga dunia menjadi aman dan sejahtera. That's it.
Thank you very much, Margarita. Next up is David.
Okay, so this is the Herald Old. The Tao is eternally inactive, yet nothing is left undone. If kings and princes grasped this truly, all creatures would develop of themselves. And if, as they developed, desire stirred within them, it would curb them by the simplicity without a name. The simplicity without a name leads to detachment from desire. Detachment from desire leads to stillness. And in this way, the world of itself would reach peace.
Thank you, David. And next up is Marco.
This is the Stephen Mitchell version. The Tao never does anything, yet through it all things are done. If powerful men and women could venture themselves in it, the whole world would be transformed by itself in its natural rhythms. People would be content with their simple everyday lives in harmony and free of desire. When there is no desire, all things are at peace.
Thank you, Marco. And Jason is now entering the room. But Aman, would you like to comment?
No, actually, I'm glad Jason's here. I was going to do it in his stead, and now he can read his own translation.
Thank you so
Jason.
much. Thank you so much, Aman.
Okay. So you guys already finished the
The first round of read? No, we just concluded. So your timing was perfect.
Oh, okay. Yeah. This I think Aman probably already talked about this one. This one should be the end of section, right? End of, in another version, so 37 is Dao and the De, that's the end of the Dao chapter or section. And the next one, 38, is the beginning of the De section. So some version is Dao first and the De as a second part, kind of part one, part two, but another version would be De first and the Dao is the second. So if according to so-called Ma Wang Dui version, that means we will not call Dao De Jing today, we will call De Dao Jing today, because 38 should be the first. Okay, but in today's tradition, 37 is the end of the part one. So you will see 37 is kind of like review everything and kind of like a conclude. And the next one will be open a new one. So the translation should be easier. I assume it's easier. So basically just review whatever we have before from 1 to 37. So the translation here I make is the Tao is constantly doing non-action, which is Wu Wei. That's the first thing. Two things that here's a review. One is Chang, constancy, okay, which is not change. Okay, unchanging Tao is doing no non-action, which is Wu Wei, and still nothing is left undone. So Wu Wei is doing non-action, but everything should be done, okay, without your action. I think that's the first message try to send out. If the ruler can practice this, which is Wu Wei, all things can transform as they should. Okay, so everything will work by themselves. As they transform, they may develop as they desire. I shall subdue them with the nameless simplicity of an uncuffed block. This one so-called Pu, okay, or it's also key message here. And if Pu means a block, uncuffed block. So here he called the I think Aman and I work out the best way to translate should be simplicity of an uncuffed block. Okay, so even a little bit long, but it really represents the meaning and the image of the Pu. Okay, then next, the nameless simplicity of an uncuffed block can curb the desires. Usually we consider the desire is not good, so cannot go out of control. So with the nameless simplicity of an uncuffed block, I think that's the principle. You can curb the desire. Without desire, there comes peace, and the world will stabilize as it should. Okay, so everything should be done by itself without much unnecessary action. We will say so-called doing wu wei. I think that would be considered as like a conclude. So the key words, has been repeatedly show up in the previous section will be constant or constancy, wu wei, namelessness, and the pu, okay, which is the simplicity of uncuffed block. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. We should spend more time on the 38 because 38 is very long.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Would anybody else like to read their favorite translation? I'll actually read mine, which was the Jim Felter version. Only see you're doing nothing, yet not a thing is left undone. For all things happen on their own, in you who are the all in one. If leaders could be centered, all 10,000 things would thrive. By seeing what is natural, all creation comes alive. Everyone would be content with living simple every day. Desires would be moderate, and peace would be the only way. Okay, folks, so now everybody can line up for what they took away from this particular poem, or verse, forgive me. Just type exclamation point in the chat. Evanique, and then Aman. Or Aman, would you like to would you like to go first?
If Evanique's all right with that,
Yeah.
I have no
I am
problem.
very good with that.
Thank you.
I
Evanique.
just wanted to say Jason hit absolutely every highlight, I believe. I saw in your shared screen my comments down on the bottom there. And I very much appreciated that translation. It is a concluding chapter, whether this is the halfway point in the text or in the Guodian version where it is the completion of the text. And it's very telling that the very first two words, Dao Chang, the Dao is constant or Dao constant. It's leaving the reader with this understanding above any other that all the lessons on the way are eternal lessons. These are not simply meant to be one person imparting an idea, but that this idea transcends the ability to impart it, and it is eternal, it is constant, it is forever there. The characteristics of Wu Wei and Pu make up the character of the Tao, and those two are constant features of the Tao. We've talked Wu Wei a bit in the past, but I do want to say that it's very easy to mistake the idea of non-action with inaction. And this is something that is teased out, I think, many times in the text, but here it really drives it home one last time that the Tao does through non-action, not via inaction. And that non-action is desireless. It is something that is free of ambition, free of expectation. This is how a leader should lead according to the text. When we move on to chapter 38 and move into the realm of De, which has been talked about and intimated in the previous chapters, you'll see where there is some overlap. There will still be discussion about the Tao or the Way or ideas like Wu Wei and Pu in the following chapters. But this is really to sort of drive it home. If you've got the message, now proceed to chapter 2. And I thought Jason's translation did an excellent job bringing that out. This is probably one of the most quoted chapters of the Dao De Jing, far and wide, if anyone is looking to sort of sum it up with quick, pithy quotes, because those opening ideas, the Tao does nothing, yet nothing is undone, are meant to sum it up as a whole. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, actually, for sharing that. I mean, I very much appreciate the distinction between non-action and inaction. That that non-action is desireless, because that is a key component that I had taken away from this particular verse as well, but I had not made that distinction. So I very much appreciate that contribution and everything you contributed. Thank you very much. As always, Aman, very, very insightful. Avanique, you're next.
Yeah, thank you. Aman, that was great. I also got a lot from the distinction between non-action versus inaction. And I think that distinction helped bring this together for me because it talks, I think inaction is, or non-action is kind of like doing what you can and then just leaving the rest. Like the phrase is like leave the rest to God, like do all that you can do for it and then just let it go. So I thought that was a good distinction. And it's like, and then when you were talking about, when Aman was actually talking about being free from ambition, it's kind of like taking your ego out of it. Like if you're trying to do something or put something out in the world, it's like take your ego out of it, like take your pride out of it, take your desire out of it, and just kind of go for the goal and then just let it go. Like if you've done everything that you can do, it's like let God, it's this phrase, let God handle the rest of it. And in another translation, it talks about those who fought against God would find their efforts futile. Evil would be restrained without evildoers knowing how. And so I think when we go for our own ambition or we're going for pride or we're going for our own, like, it's kind of like if you're just doing something to show how great you are, then you're fighting against God. Like if you're doing things and you're doing things with your effort, your talents are going to show. You don't have to say it. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to like undercut anybody else. You don't have to try to shine. You can just be who you are and it'll come out. Your talents will come out. So that's what I got.
Thank you, Avanique. And next we have Jenny.
Well, if everyone lived the way Dao, what a peaceful world we could be living in. That's all I want to say.
Oh, thank you, Jenny. And Katie, you're next.
As I was reading it, a couple of metaphors came up because when I first read it, I kind of like Aman was saying, in action. That was what I got confused with at first. So I thought, like, well, if you're sitting in a bar, like, how is your paper going to get written? But I think it's also like some metaphors came up, like floating something on a river. Like you'd be kind of going with the tide, or like rolling a ball down a hill would still be like action, versus like rolling a ball up a hill would be a lot of effort. So I think it's also just a principle of like of doing things in flow with the Tao.
Thank you, Katie. And next we have Jason.
Yeah, because just quick example about the Wu Wei, that's one thing we can remember. Everything when we face choice, not making choice is also one choice. And a lot of time, like, when you have a salesman try to sell like a vacation plan or something, they usually will end with, we have the plan A and the plan B, and this one, there's which one you like. And from time to time we forget. We think, oh, B is a better deal, so we choose this one. But sometimes we forget. We can say, no, I don't want either one, right? So a lot of times it can remind us, not making choice, also one of your choice. That's the thing we can learn from Dao De Jing.
Yeah, I found that one of the most, and I am very great. I'm profoundly grateful to Aman for even pointing out the distinction between non-action and inaction. the idea of tempering our desires, essentially, it allows for nature and acceptance of what is. And it's not, nature is not something that we need to necessarily overcome. We need to just allow to be. And that's the distinction for me with the idea of non-action versus inaction. Let me see if I had anybody next up in the queue. I have Charlie.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I think it was Aman who, when we were talking about this before, mentioned an example in the sense of non-action. And he was talking about somebody who told him a story about being in a mental hospital as a worker there. And somebody was acting up and causing a lot of trouble. And the person who had been on this ward for many, many, many years, okay, very seasoned professional, to use a cliche, and he noticed that that this problem existed, and he walked over very slowly. I guess he finished up what he was doing, whatever that was, and then he walked towards the problem in a very slow, casual manner, and then by the time he got there, the person had kind of worked out a lot of the energy of frustration over or whatever it was that was motivating him, and so that when that person arrived there and put his hand on his shoulder or something, and that just that action of touching him calmed him down. And I know I'm not saying this exactly the way Aman said it, but I'm kind of, I don't know if the word right, paraphrasing is the right way of saying it. But anyway, it's basically that idea that sometimes what would appear to be non-action is action, and but it's just contextualized in a way that it's action that is better action and makes more sense in a larger perspective. And for me, one of the issues, I guess, that I struggle with is the difference between Buddhism and Taoism, because my understanding of Taoism is that it avoids language, okay, and Zen Buddhism, which derived from Chan Buddhism, which is supposed to have had been influenced by Taoism in its origination, has that same kind of ethos of avoiding talk, okay, and that of living in the present. And but one of the things that Buddhism does is it does talk, okay, and it talks about eternalism, and it talks about nihilism, and the middle way is finding your way between us. So there's a lot of talk in Buddhism that doesn't happen in Zen Buddhism, and it doesn't happen in Taoism, as I understand it. And so I was a little bit surprised when Aman talked about the way as being eternal, because I wonder, since Taoism says, to avoid words, to just be in the present, that it seems like it would be, surprising that someone who is, that a Taoist would say that. I don't know that Aman considers himself to be a Taoist, but that word of eternalism to me is a kind of a red flag for dogmatism, and so I kind of get I wonder, okay, because my understanding of Taoism is that it just says forget about all this language stuff and just be present, but Buddhism says, well, no, you gotta talk, you gotta have some kind of a discussion about what this is all about, and but you have to take the middle way, which is between those two extremes of nihilism and eternalism, and so I don't know. This is something I'm trying to work out in my own mind, and so I really don't know, what to make of this. But anyway, I just want to mention that as a something involved with this this Wu Wei is difference between non-action and inaction, because Buddhism is accused of quietism. It is accused often of just people sitting on their posterior and doing nothing. And so, I mean, this is kind of a hot button issue for a lot of people when they're either looking from the inside or from the outside with regards to Taoism and Buddhism. But I think that's a non-issue myself personally, but it's not completely, because a lot of people do retire to monasteries and basically or go living in the caves, and so you wonder, well, who's this for? Is it for some personal individual to deal with their own angst about being a human being in a crazy world, or is it really about trying to help make a better world? Anyway, that's all I want to say.
Jason or Aman, would you like to respond to Charlie's comments at all? I know Jason okay. Jason, you have an explanation.
Can I make it clear, Charlie? You talk about eternity. You talk about in this chapter, the Tao talk about eternity.
No. I was comparing Buddhism with Taoism, and that they both kind of have a similar understanding of looking at the whole, okay, of being present, and that the idea of logical ways of, the way of trying to use words to explain what is going on is a gesture in futility. Both the Buddhists and the Taoists seem to agree on that. But the Taoists, from what I understand, and my understanding is very limited, but from what I understand is it's kind of like you don't go there, okay? Whereas Buddhism goes into this whole thing with Nagarjuna and his Mula Madhyamika Karika, and it's incredibly logical and just really mind-bending stuff about why you shouldn't do it. And but it seems like Taoism just kind of finesses the whole issue by just saying don't go there.
Okay, I'd like to few things I'd like to make is first in this chapter it doesn't talk about. I don't think Tao. Okay, when I say Taoism, I focus on this text. Dao De Jing, okay, not other thing. I just focus on this Taoism. So this text, I don't think it mentioned a lot of eternity, but the constant words show up, the so-called Chang, which means unchangeability, okay, something constant, not change. It could be a little bit different, similar to eternity, but its focus is its unchangeability, not its long lasting. Okay, I think that's the first thing I'd like to mention. Second thing, it's Buddhism and Taoism are not being comparison. But when we say Buddhism, it's a very complex concept. Just like when people from Asia come to America, ask what is Abrahanism, which includes Judaism, Catholic, Protestant, Muslim, all together. So Buddhism is very, very different from section to section. One time I try to, in my Meetup, I try to lay out the Zen Buddhism in China. I can't, because they have the north, they have the south. At the south, they have the branch of the branch. They all different, okay? Yeah. And when Western world constantly talk about live in the moment, actually, that's the version from Suzuki, that's his version of the Japanese Zen. Okay, it doesn't represent the whole Buddhism. Okay, so that's the thing I just like to mention. Kind of.
But don't they all kind of agree on emptiness as a central?
No.
Really?
That's you talk about the Shunyata, which is Mahayana, but Theravada focus more on the mindfulness meditation and the focus on the original teaching. Okay, so they all agree on most of the things, but the focus is very different.
Thank you for that, Jason. Margarita.
Hi, yes, I listening to Charlie, I remember when I read this, I also think about Buddhism, but yeah, like Jason said, there are many discipline in Buddhism, Mahayana, Hinayana, it's so different. Like even in Indonesia, it's different from my friends in India. When we talk, it's not the same. But I think I experienced this. For example, when I go to the sea and there's this big wave coming, but this big wave, I can still understand where it came from. So I try to name it. I try to understand why this big wave is coming, so I can do something. But there are times that when the wave comes with the storm, so it's a bit difficult for me to understand what happened here. So what I can do, I don't name things because that's just too chaotic. I just sit still. And I believe that this wave, just like it will pass. So it's this is also what I usually do when dealing with people with trauma. I don't help them to manage to control their trauma because it's just difficult. Non-action is actually preferable. It's just to listen, to see that this chaotic feeling will happen, and eventually it will dissolve. So perhaps that is Wu Wei when we're dealing with problems in our life. There are times that perhaps like we need to do a virtue, something like controlling something, but in a way, dealing with like big problem, we need just to be still. And the non-action, I think that's preferable. Yeah, that's my take from this. Thanks.
Thank you, Margarita. Aman, would you like to respond? And then Brian.
Yeah, briefly, without trying to detract too far, but Charlie, you were asking about the comparison Buddhism and Taoism and this idea of emptiness. Emptiness is a concept that comes out of Nagarjuna about 500 years after the inception of Buddhism, and it was his interpretation of dependent origination, which is sort of an esoteric explanation of the impermanence of things in the Tripitaka, the traditional Buddhist canon. When you actually, and Jason's absolutely right, it's huge. As a religion and sects go, there is as much diversity as there is within something like the community of Christian or any other large religion. But if you do sort of brass tacks it, where Buddhism and Taoism made their first encounter around the 3rd century or so, they shared enough similar ideas that they were able to enter into dialogue with one another in a very constructive way. So constructive, in fact, it kind of gave birth to Chan Buddhism, which later becomes Zen Buddhism, or as a professor I know likes to put it, Chan Buddhism really is just Taoism in Buddhist drag. There is a lot of overlap that exists there. But as far as the idea of the eternal, Jason's right. Eternal is not necessarily the best way to translate that term, chang, that I put into the chat, which really does mean constant. It means a consistency. And that is different than eternal. And the way I would sort of differentiate the two is that a lot of dogmatic ways of thinking of eternal is like some grand mountain that stands firm against all the tests of time. Whereas constant is more like the flow of a river. It will flow. That is constant. It can shift its flow. It can alter its direction. It can dry down or breach its banks. But the flowing of it is a constant feature that makes it, by definition, a river. In the same way, the Tao is a concept that is more in flow and similar to these ideas that, again, these Buddhists share with them, neti, it's not something that can be talked about and captured in language. It is ineffable, but we can discuss around it and get a notion of it. And so when I've argued this with Buddhists in the past, the idea, we get to this point where we talk about these composites of existence, and the Buddhists always seem to land on, but look at the center, there's nothing there. And I do identify as a Taoist, and as a Taoist, I always say, yes, but that nothing is something. And this is really kind of the bone of contention where we part ways. They see that all the composites form around nothing, and that nothing constitutes nothing as a whole. Whereas I believe the Taoists see the nothing more like the eye of a storm or the air in a tire. Sure, it's hollow, but that nothing is absolutely quintessential to the existence of everything else around it for its existence, and therefore constitutes a something worth considering. Really kind of far out on a limb here, I know, but hopefully that gives you a little better understanding of both the similarities and the differences between the two.
Thank you very much. That was very clarifying. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you very, very much, Aman. And Jason, you wish to also comment?
Yeah, that's quick. A lot of people have misunderstanding about the emptiness in Dao De Jing. Actually, if you search word by word, there's no so-called emptiness in Dao De Jing. Okay, I just information. So when I do the translation, I try to avoid this word because a lot of translation put the Dao De Jing use emptiness, but that's really use Buddhism concept to interpret Dao De Jing. So in the Dao De Jing, I just want to tell everybody there's no word called emptiness. There's something, nothing, no action, the negation, but there's no something as a term, emptiness, shunyata, this kind of meaning here. So yeah.
Thank you for that clarification, actually, because I was actually talking to somebody about space and I used the word emptiness mistakenly. So thank you for that. Really quickly, and Aman, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you just mentioned, and if we can just go on to the next one, the next verse, if you don't feel like answering this particular question, but you said it was one of the most quoted verses in the entire Tao. Jason or Aman, do you care to comment as to why that is?
Probably because it is a summational chapter. It really tries to epitomize so many of the concepts of, especially the first half of the Dao De Jing, the concepts and tenets of when we can't talk about what the Dao is, Dao Ke, Dao Fei Cheng Dao. You can't talk about it. You can't have discourse on it. But this is about as near as anyone got to really capturing it in black and white on paper in a way that communicates enough for somebody to at least get an impressionistic feel of what this is all about. And I really do think the Tao does nothing but leaves nothing undone. There are so many textbooks where some iteration of that will be quoted as, this is our stepping point off of what the Tao is and what Wu Wei is. And those are two of the most fundamental things. Kind of like if you were to have anything, and I loathe to say it this way, but anything resembling a Nicene Creed to Taoism, that phrase probably comes about as close as you're going to get.
Okay, wow, thank you for that. And Jason, and then Brian, I believe, Brian or Penny, and then Sakit, am I saying your name correctly? Would you like to comment as well?
Okay, so Aman said this one is the most quoted. Okay, so as a Chinese reader, I would say that's the second most quoted. The most quoted, of course, the first one, 道可道非常道, the Dao can be, that's the most quoted, okay, in both Chinese and in Western, in Dao De Jing. I think this one is the second most quoted. It's the first sentence called 道常无为而不为. That means that means Dao is doing no action or 无为, but nothing left undone. Okay, that's why Aman said that's the most quoted. I think this sentence is the second most quoted. In Dao De Jing.
So I have, thank you, Jason, and I have Brian next. And forgive me, Brian. I know that you got caught up in the back and forth there the first time that you put your exclamation point in. So, Brian, please.
So I'm focusing on this. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm focusing on the line that talks about kings and lords. So what does Wu Wei look like for kings and lords? And for me, it might look something like this, and that is that they just watch. They just watch. And the fact that they are there watching will change people's behaviors. And I say that I have different other references for that. The Jean-Paul Sartre said that being seen is everyone's first most important experience, and it changes the way they live their lives. Also, you look at Horus in the Egyptian mythology. He's a hawk represented with the eye. And when he went to recover Osiris, he recovered his father's eye. So it's watching, and that's in a government. Osiris is a leader, a king and a lord. And also, I have to apologize, I don't know exactly where all of the context in which this arises, but on certain Buddhist monuments, and again, we've talked about how diverse Buddhism is, you'll see the two eyes that are just watching. And I think that is also in the Hindu. You'll see the two eyes just watching. And another reference, maybe not so benign, is the Big Brother in 1984. The Big Brother is two eyes just watching. So I think that's some of those are evidence that yes, just watching is powerful as a leader, but also it's really doing, it's non-action. It's non-action. So that's just my impression from this.
Thank you for sharing that. Which version were you reading from, just out of curiosity? Was it Jia Fufang?
Looks like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's what I thought. Okay. And so thank you for those insights. Is it Sakit? Am I saying your name correctly? You need to unmute.
Yes, yeah, that's okay. That's fine. Most
How
of the
would-
people call me
how do I-
Sakit. Yeah, that's
Okay.
okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So these two words, Shunyata and Natiniti, are Sanskrit word because I come from that background, Hindu background, and a lot of text from Buddhism and even Zen Buddhism have been taken from Sanskrit, that those old scriptures, and which and in Dao De Jing, I think that was that word which was missing, which can't be spoken about. If you compare it with the Hinduism, Sanskrit old texture, they actually had a word for that. It's called chitta. They call it chitta. That means consciousness, awareness. So they introduced that word in that, which Buddhism and Taoism avoid to use because they call it whatever, nothingness or emptiness, because they don't want to give it any form or name. And this shunyata, it comes from, yeah, that Sanskrit, that background. I think there is, when I read those scriptures, whether it is Buddhism or Taoism, I don't find any difference in essence what they're talking about. And I think they're pointing out towards the silence of mind, and neti is again is a way of removing all the content of the mind by negation, not this, not this, not this, and by negation coming upon that ultimate thing called chitta, which is consciousness, which can't be approached by mind or any mental effort. And this is what in Dao De Jing, I think Lao Tzu has pointed out. It's very, very essential for the mind to stop making any effort before that chitta reveals, that consciousness reveals itself, which has its own movement, which is the way of life. That it says it's only the mind's actions which is the hindrance for that consciousness to take its own action. This is the crux of what I understand.
Thank you very much for that contribution as well. One of the things that I actually had taken away is the idea of, in my notes when I read the version that I chose anyway, was the idea of tranquility and how silencing the mind is so important. And it's kind of one of the reasons that actually I've enjoyed this series above all others is because that it has provided me with a certain way of looking at the world, and not going against nature, but trying to actually work with nature. And it's done it in a very peaceful way. So with that, we can actually go to start number 38. Or would you like to comment? Or Jason, please forgive me.
I'd like to kind of respond to what Brian talked about the Wu Wei for the king and the lord. As you might know, from the beginning, I keep emphasize this one is Lao Tzu teaching the lord or the prince, not teaching you, just like Bhagavad Gita or anything. They teach the people. Okay, but not everybody agree with me. But I think all the interpretation basics based on reading this, and you have your own lesson. That's fine. But the Wu Wei has been that's my opinion, suggest to the ruler all the time. Okay, not suggest to the individual. Okay, so in this way, you can look at it in two ways. Lao Tzu suggests the ruler doing Wu Wei. Number one is you can do this disturbance to the people. So you don't do too many things. You just let people do whatever they want to do, okay? And don't bother people. In the early Han Dynasty, they really do this way. And because that's after long war, so the country become more, prosperous. Okay, that's one way to do. Another way would be a little bit terrible, okay, but not like Brian talked about like have eye gaze, Sartre's way. No, I don't. At least I don't see this way. The other way is Chinese legalism. Okay, point of view. That means ask the ruler, practice Wu Wei, not doing too much. Set up the law, have the law reward and punish the people. So the ruler can be Wu Wei and they don't have to do anything. So you can go these two directions. That's why the Chinese famous legalist list, Han Feizhi, he has two sections on his 55 books. They have two books interpret Lao Tzu Dao De Jing. So a lot of people kind of see how come a Dao De Jing, which is quietism, and will be the source of the legalism, okay, a terrible philosophy. How does it come out? It's coming from here. Depend on how are you going to look at the Wu Wei. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Aman.
I actually have to run. The family is here, but Jason, you gave me the perfect segue to offering the perfect segue, which is I actually wanted to comment on what you were asking, Brian, about, what does the leader who leads out of Wu Wei look like? I don't know that I absolutely know. I know that many have adopted the trappings of Taoist philosophy, whether overtly or inadvertently, in order to offer themselves some degree of legitimation. In fact, Reagan famously actually quoted the Dao De Jing when he quoted the passage about ruling a country as like cooking a small fish. Too much poking ruins it. That's an homage to Wu Wei. But Jason, you mentioned Han Feizhi, and the next chapter that you will be starting as I go and have dinner is the first chapter of the Dao De Jing. In Han Feizhi's commentary that he comments on is chapter 38. So for him, the next chapter you are going to approach really gets at what he thinks was most fundamental in constructing his version of legalism out of many texts, but this one included. So I wish I could stay to see how y'all talk about it, but have a great night. I'll look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thank you, Aman. And before you go, I just wanted to, I'll just say it now. It is truly, it's an honor to be hosting this evening with both Jason and Aman and having your insights each week. I take away a great deal from both of you. I just wanted to say that before you left. And I look forward to seeing you next week.
Nali. Thank you all. Have a great night.
Thank you. So with that, we will, if there are no other comments in the chat, which I don't see, then number 38, we'll move on to verse 38. Who would like to read their version? Verse 38. Type exclamation point in the chat. Evanique, thank you. You're always first.
Of course.
Much appreciated. I understand how that's an act of courage.
Oh, thank you. So number 38, this is from the Tao of Christ. So 38, the righteous person does not follow rules, yet he fulfills the will of God perfectly. The unrighteous person obeys moral laws religiously, which is why he falls short of God's will. The godly person does nothing by her own strength. That is why she does all things well. The moral person does good deeds without ulterior motives. The immoral person always has an eye on the reward. The righteous person leads by example, but if no one follows, he continues to do his work without resentment. When God is rejected, faith appears. When faith is abandoned, morality appears. When morality is forsaken, religion appears. Religion is the empty husk of faith, the beginning of the end of civilization. Christ dwells in the inmost place and not in externals. He is the seed, not the flower. The wise person abides in him.
Thank you very much, Evanique. Next up, we have David, followed by Katie.
Great. Thanks, Joseph. So the highest power is not aware of itself as power, hence its power. The inferior power clings to the appearance of power, hence its lack of power. The highest power works by non-action and has no ulterior aims. The inferior power acts and claims recognition. The highest loving kindness acts without motive. The highest justice acts with motive. The highest ritual of convention and respectability acts, and if there is no response, force is used to compel respect. Therefore, when the Tao is lost, power appears. When the power is lost, loving kindness appears. When loving kindness is lost, justice appears. When justice is lost, ritual appears. Ritual is but the shadow of faith and loyalty and the beginning of confusion. Prediction of what is to come is doubtless an offshoot of the Tao, but the beginning of ignorant folly. Therefore, he who is truly great holds to the substance and not to the shadow. He holds to the main stem and not to the offshoot. Thus, he disregards that and nurtures this.
Thank you very much, David. Which version was that?
Sorry, this is the Harold Ould version.
Okay, thank you. It's actually very, very close to my translation that I have, that I was planning to read.
Yeah, I mean, I have some other, if we don't have enough people, I can read the Fing English or the Hendricks version or.
Okay. Okay, that would be actually great if
I mean, when, after other people have spoken.
Sure. Katie, then Margarita.
I think Judith normally reads the Stephen Mitchell one, so I'll read that one since she's not here. The master doesn't try to be powerful, thus he is truly powerful. The ordinary man keeps reaching for power, thus he never has enough. The master does nothing, yet he leaves nothing undone. The ordinary man is always doing things, yet many more are left to be done. The kind man does something, yet something remains undone. The just man does something and leaves many things to be done. The moral man does something, and when no one responds, he rolls up his sleeves and uses force. When the Tao is lost, there's goodness. And when goodness is lost, there's morality. And when morality is lost, there is ritual. Ritual is the husk of true faith, the beginning of chaos. Therefore, the master concerns himself with the depths and not the surface, with the fruit and not the flower. He has no will of his own. He dwells in reality and lets all illusions go.
Thank you very much, Katie. And she does actually always read the Stephen Mitchell version, so thank you for sharing that. Next up, I have Margarita.
Hi. So again, this is Bahasa. I think most of the translation have the same meaning. So, kebajikan luhur tidak dikenal sebagai kebajikan, tapi justru inilah kebajikan sejati. Kebajikan rendah terlihat nyata, akan tetapi justru karena kelihatan, maka ia bukan kebajikan yang sewajarnya. Kebajikan luhur tanpa berbuat, namun tidak ada dikerjakan olehnya. Kebajikan yang rendah dilakukan menurut keinginan aku, maka perbuatannya berdasar pamrih. Budi luhur melakukan kebajikan tanpa minta balas budi. Keadilan luhur berkehendak mendapatkan sesuatu yang sesuai dengan pekerjaannya. Peradaban tinggi dibangun tapi tidak mendapat sambutan. Dengan menyingsingkan lengan baju, berusaha supaya peraturan itu dituruti. Kalau diperlukan, dengan kekerasan dan paksaan. Akan tetapi umumnya tidak diindahkan. Bila sifat Dao yang sewajarnya lenyap, kemudian orang menunjukkan kebajikan, setelah sifat kebajikan itu lenyap, lantas orang menunjukkan cinta kasih. Setelah cinta kasih lenyap, orang menunjukkan keadilan. Setelah keadilan lenyap, orang lalu menyusun peraturan. Setelah orang menyusun peraturan, maka menandakan kesetiaan dan kejujuran dari rakyat sudah tipis, sehingga harus dibalut sehingga kekalutan merajalela. Kebajikan-kebajikan yang diwariskan oleh para budiman sekarang hanya dibanggakan bagai barang indah tapi tidak dijalankan sesungguhnya. Dan ini adalah permulaan suatu kebodohan. This is really deep, yeah. I think, and I want to comment a bit. I just realized it is true when culture just being brought up and passed down from generation to generation without understanding it, how to put that in the context, is just stupidity. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And so we don't have anyone else. What I can do is I'll read the version and then Jason will go to you for your translation in a moment. So mine is, I selected the Jia Fu Fang. A truly good man is not aware of his goodness and is therefore good. A foolish man tries to be good and is therefore not good. A truly good man does nothing, yet leaves nothing undone. A foolish man is always doing, yet much remains to be done. When a truly kind man does something, he leaves nothing undone. When a just man does something, he leaves a great deal to be done. When a disciplinarian does something and no one responds, he rolls up his sleeves in an attempt to enforce order. Therefore, the Tao is lost. There is goodness. When goodness is lost, there is kindness. When kindness is lost, there is justice. When justice is lost, there is ritual. Now ritual is the husk of faith and loyalty, the beginning of confusion. Knowledge of the future is only a flowery trapping of the Tao. It is the beginning of folly. Therefore, the truly great man dwells on what is real and not what is on the surface, on the fruit and not of the flower, not the flower. Therefore, accept the one and reject the other. Okay, and Jason, let me see if there's anybody else that wishes to read.
David?
Yeah, David, go ahead.
Well, actually, I mean, there are two more I think that are really interesting about the Hendricks. We always read Ursula Le Guin, so let me also read hers. So the Hendricks version. I mean, what I find is interesting, and maybe Jason will talk about this, is some of these are very humanized. I mean, they speak about the man, and some of these are more sort of abstract, that the virtue. I mean, it's interesting how they choose the translation to make it personal or impersonal. So I mean, the Hendricks, it makes this again sort of impersonal, like we were discussing, whereas you were describing with the thing in English, where it's like a truly good man, a truly good person. Interesting noticing that difference. So Hendricks is, the highest virtue is not virtuous, therefore it truly has virtue. The lowest virtue never loses sight of its virtue, therefore it has no true virtue. The highest virtue takes no action, yet it has no reason for acting this way. The highest humanity takes action, yet it has no reason for acting this way. The highest righteousness takes action, and it has its reasons for acting this way. The highest propriety takes action, and when no one responds to it, then it angrily rolls up its sleeves and forces people to comply. Therefore, the way is lost, and only then do we have virtue. When virtue is lost, only then do we have humanity. When humanity is lost, only then do we have righteousness. And when righteousness is lost, only then do we have propriety. As for propriety, it's but the thin edge of loyalty and sincerity and the beginning of disorder. And foreknowledge is but the flower of the way and the beginning of stupidity. Therefore, the great man dwells in the thick and doesn't dwell in the thin, dwells in the fruit and doesn't dwell in the flower. Therefore, he rejects and takes this. And if I might, the Ursula Gwynn talking about power, hers is great power, not clinging to power, has true power. Lesser power, clinging to power, lacks true power. Great power, doing nothing, has nothing to do. Lesser power, doing nothing, has an end in view. The good, the truly good do has no end in view. The right, the very righteous do has an end in view. And those who act in true obedience to law roll up their sleeves and make the disobedient obey. So when we lose the way, we find power. Losing power, we find goodness. Losing goodness, we find righteousness. Losing righteousness, we're left with obedience. Obedience to law is the dry husk of loyalty and good faith. Opinion is the barren flower of the way, the beginning of ignorance. So great-minded people abide in the kernel, not the husk, in the fruit, not the flower, letting the one go, keeping the other.
Sorry about that, I was on mute. Thank you so much for reading both of those versions. I really appreciate that, David. Jason, would you like to go ahead and share your version?
Okay, I think this version is very long, and then Margareta talked about like all the version are the same, and I think at least mine is very different because just like David talked about two versions, and the one is like personal, one is powerful, and the challenge in the ancient, especially in this text, is there's no, all the sentences have no subject. So we have to assume who he spoke to by the context. So that's why I think he's talking to the government officer or the ruler, because I cannot imagine Lao Tzu is talking to the regular people about this. Like even Confucius is not teaching the common people; he's teaching the government officer. So I think that's the understanding here. And the second thing is just like Amang and I, we talk about this chapter is the part 2. Okay, the first one of the part 2, which is De. Okay, and the De is a difficult translation. That's why sometimes you hear the translation called virtue, sometimes they call power. Okay, so basically you can think about the quality, power, virtue, which is since Dao is untouchable, unknowable, it's a high score. But if you want to do something, you have to do with virtue, okay, which is you can follow, okay, you can, something you can follow, something you can practice. So that's why this section start to call it de, okay, and that's why the translation is different here. And another thing, another two things I don't see any translation catch up is here actually talk about wu wei, no action. When we mentioned on the previous, I talked about, but during the translation, another translation, I think most of the translation lost the concept of wu wei here. Okay, that's the first thing I'd like to mention. Second, this one is really, really an attack on Confucian, okay, on Confucian teaching, because they tell that the Taoism criticize Confucius is not saying you are wrong, okay. They are saying you are not doing wu wei. Actually, that's the second or third way to do it. The best way to do it Taoist way. So I think that's the thing most of translation didn't catch up. And somebody may ask, well, Confucian, is, and the Lao Tzu should be older than the Confucius, like how he attacked Confucians. So two reasons. One, this one could be people created later time, okay, to predate it. Okay, that's one possibility. Another thing is actually the founder of Confucian may not be Confucius, because Confucius, the teaching is based on the concept so-called Ru tradition. That's been before Confucius have something called Ru condition. That's why in Chinese Confucianism, so-called Ru Jia, okay, so Ru, that's the word, probably have a long tradition, and Confucius is the one who focus on that. So that's the background on this chapter. So I like to do the my translation. It's a little bit long, and just hope not too boring. And if I lost you, please just yell out so I can make it clear. I just have to say this one is a little bit long. And then another thing I make a difference, I've been thinking for a long time, is here has all the translation put like high virtual, low virtual, superior virtual, or inferior. And I don't see that's the way. I think the word should be skillful and unskillful. So that means you do it with the right way or the better way. You can call it high, but I think it really means, assuming Lao Tzu is teaching the ruler. Okay, so they have the more skillful way, or you do it without skill. Okay, and the skill is not like a technique based on the kind of the subtle way to do it. So, okay, so let me start. I'm going to translate the as a virtue. Okay, so the skillful virtual action follows law of virtue because the actions are already full of virtue. Okay. If you look at Chinese, they have the three words. Same word here, so-called 上德不德是以有德. Okay, so the virtue show up 3 times. So I will say, I will claim the first virtue. Okay, the first one is talking about the action. Just 1 minute. Okay. The first virtue is talking about the action, the governing skill. Okay, and the second one, the second virtue means the following the rule of virtue. Okay, and then the third one means the shall we call it virtue or not virtue? Okay, so that's the 3 words, the same word in Chinese, but they have a different angle to look at it. So the first one talk about skillful. Then the second one will be a little bit different. The so-called the unskillful action of virtue don't disobey law of virtue. Okay, because the action are short of virtue. Okay, you think about the situation, a ruler. If you already have a virtue, yourself, your company already virtue, you don't have to follow the virtue. You create the virtue. Very similar to what Nietzsche talked about the morality, okay, beyond good and evil. You create your own virtue. And on the lower level, so-called unskillful, basically, you have to follow some preset virtue, okay? So that's the message he's talking about. Then the next one. The skillful action of virtue are action of non-action, okay, without intention. The unskillful action of virtue are action and with intention. So the difference between them is the first one, the skillful one, is doing 无为 non-action, okay, without intention. The unskillful one basics is doing action and with intention. That's the difference, okay? One is 无为, one is not 无为. One is without intention. One is with intention. You have way to think about it. Okay, so here we talk about Dao. We talk about De. Okay, that's the Laozi's teaching, the Taoism teaching. Then later on, it's going to talk about there's the three words, Ren, Yi, Li. Okay, and the translation I translate as humanist, and sometimes you put a kindness or the benevolence, so-called Ren, and Yi, okay, so-called the righteousness, okay, or goodness, okay, or justice, and the Li, which is riches, okay. So these three words, Ren, Yi, Li, it show up many times in Confucius teaching. So whenever we see these three words, we know Laozi is talking about Confucius, okay, talk about Confucius, the situation. So Sakit, I think you can, okay. So basics, the translation, the skillful acts out of humanity are action without intention. The skillful acts out of righteousness, which is Yi, are action with intention. The skillful acts out of ritual are action without any genuine response. Okay, that means it's not work this way. People then must be dragged by arms to perform the ritual. So here is very vividly describe the situation. He talked about the people perform ritual is not willing to do it because being forced to do it. And they use a very vivid description, being dragged to do it. I don't see this really people dragged to do it, but he means the words say, 攘臂而扔之, that means somebody drag your arm and to do it, okay? And then I think the meaning means you practice, you perform ritual by force, I mean invisible hand to push you to do this. Then Laozi is going to say, therefore, lacking the Tao, people start to act from virtue. Lacking virtue, people start to act from humanism, which is Confucius teaching. See, without Tao, then people start to do De, okay? And without De, people start to act from humanistness, okay, which is Confucius teaching, okay? Lacking humanist teaching, lacking humanist, people start to act from righteousness. That's another Confucius teaching. Lacking righteousness, people start to act from ritual. Okay, that's another important Confucius teaching. Okay, he's going to continue to attack Confuciusness. Those who act from ritual lack loyalty and trustworthiness. Usually, disturbance start with this action. Those who believe ritual only act from the flowery style of the Tao. Usually, follies begin from this belief. Okay, so this word, some translation call prophet, prediction, or sometimes call foreknowledge, and I disagree because here, if you put means, he used the word for or before. I think he means the previous mentioned people, which means the person who believe Li, which is rituals. Okay, so these two sentences should go together because they talk about continue to attack the Confucians. Okay, therefore, the great people always keep what is essential, avoid what is lacking, keep to what is fruitful, avoid what is flowery. I think it's very obvious, and most people translate the same way. Indeed, they prefer what is within to what is without. This one called 故去彼取此. Okay, this word, this sentence show up 3 times on chapter 12 and this chapter and chapter 72 or something. It's going to show up 3 times. And I check all of them, they basically mean the same thing. Okay, and more before I translate as the formal, the later, this, later, I don't think that's right. I think that should be means something within and something without. Okay, so that's what you want to do. And the teaching, how does it convince people? I think a lot of people may not see it's convincing. Then I realize if I make a table, okay, you will make it very, that's the way Chinese, you see the words, a lot of things are lined up together, okay? Because the Chinese word is like every word have the same size and the monotone. So when you read it, it becomes like, you know, very easy to convince people. But after you translate, you find out it doesn't fit the logic. So I make it a table, okay? A few things here is talking about is Dao, right? Another the virtue, which include the skillful and unskillful, and the Ren, which is humanist, and the Yi, righteousness, and the ritual. There's many things here. And the basic, the language, if we make a table, we will make it very clear. So for the skillful De, okay, so we have certain item, virtue, okay, 无为 or non-intentionality, okay. So you will see, compare the skillful De basics is not act on the virtue, the law of virtue. And does it do 无为? Yes. Does it unintentional? Yes, it's unintentional. Second level will be unskillful De. It's act on the law of the teaching of virtue. Is that 无为? No, it's not doing 无为. And is that doing intentionally? Yes, they do it intentionally because they are not unintentional. Okay, then here comes with Confucius teaching, humanisticness, okay, which is not doing on virtue, or the Confuciusness, right? Ren, Yi, Li are not on the virtue. Okay, so Ren, Yi, Li, they are not doing 无为, they are doing something. The difference between Ren and the Yi, humanist and the righteousness, is Ren is doing from your heart. So it's no intentionality. It's not intentional to do it naturally. The Yi is something you intended to do it. Okay. And then the rituals, even worse, it's not doing 无为. That means you're doing something, and then not only your intention doesn't work, you have to use outside force to make it work. So this one is Lao Tzu's attack on Confucius teaching here. And it lay out clearly the highest Dao, okay, then go to the virtue, which is Li. Then if Li doesn't work, you go to the humanist, which is Ren. And if Ren doesn't work, go to the next level, which is righteousness, Yi. And the righteousness doesn't work, then go to Li, which is rituals. Okay, so that's the, if you lay out this table, then things will become a little bit clear on that. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Jason. Yeah, it's interesting because the previous verse there we go. The previous verse, actually, I was talking about the idea of not having, of limiting your desire. Your desires are limited. And I kind of look at as intention, if that you're intending to do something, that you may be checking your desire in that process, that you may restrain yourself from a desire, acting with intention. But the way you just put it actually made a lot more sense, especially the way it fits into that framework that you provided us. Anyway, not everybody wants to listen to me here. So go ahead and type an exclamation point to comment on poem number 38. Go ahead. I have, okay, I'm sorry. I have, where does it start? Does that start with you, David? And then it goes to Sakit, and then Krishna,
Yeah, I actually had a question for Jason about this. I mean, it's very interesting, as it said. I mean, all of his discussion. I mean, what struck out to me is this, his comments about these Confucius types of argument that is in this verse versus the, Dao De Jing. I mean, and so I was curious. I mean, I agree again with his very, interesting, aspect that this is clearly. I mean, I almost think of this as like, this is the prince, Machiavelli. This is instruction to a leader or ruler, just as Confucius. And I was curious if there's any thought or understanding or theory about this. Was this reference to Confucius? Because I mean, they were aware of each other. Was this simply a matter of like, in addition to the teachings to this ruler, that this is sort of a dig at Confucius of we're just going to sort of attack this other school or just, belittle this school while we're doing this teaching? Or was this a thought that Confucius is teaching it different? I mean, we're talking about, north, south, these are different, kingdoms, these are different groups of teaching, that Confucius's training to a ruler is really wrong. And we know that, they're teaching, and this is a wrong teaching. And so we are, proposing this other teaching, and this is why the teaching is wrong. So in other words, was this really at the level of, if we can infer anything, I mean, I know we can't interview or have a lot of documentation about this, but is this thought to be that this was a teaching to the ruler, that their theory that this allows infrastructure approach to this is better, and that this is why it's better for a ruler to behave to in this way as opposed to Confucius' way? Or is this reference to the Confucius teachings and sort of theory and philosophy just sort of secondary, as a matter of we're going to teach this king the right way, or what we believe is the right way to do it, but we also just want to put in this side jab at the Confucius way because we want to just belittle this school while we're at it?
Yeah. Can I answer?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's we need to think about this one, because David, I appreciate your question, because most of people may think about like, okay, here's a school like university, right? And the school for the leader, okay, the MBA executive MBA school program, all the CEO, potential CEO sitting there to teach, and they have a major as Confucianism or Taoism or whatever, legalism. But it's not this situation, right? Because during that time, Confucius' time is much earlier, which so-called spring and autumn, okay, and then. Later on, when the Mencius or Zhuangzi's time, that's called the warring state. Warring state, if we talk about the concept of school, that's on the east, Qi, kingdom of Qi, they set up a school, okay? But the school is not teaching. Basics is like academy, okay? They have a lot of scholars, they debate, they talk about, just as for the ruler, just like promote academic. So that's why generally so-called 100 school here. Okay, then back to the text here. When the Dao De Jing, Confucius teaching, okay, we have to view Confucius is a failed politician. Okay, he kind of, you should view him as a party leader. Okay, he have a 50, 70, a lot of students, so-called a member of the party who agree with his teaching. So he bring them, search around, and try to find a job. And until 53 years old, Confucius get a job. Okay, kind of like a chief policeman or something, chief police officer, something like this. But after 3 years, he got fired. Okay, so he kept working for this until 70 years old. So that's his teaching. Okay, and then he just basically he's trying to sell his idea to all the so-called philosophers. You can consider them as a salesperson. They traveling around, try to sell their idea to the ruler. And then Taoism is a little bit different. It could be Zhuangzi, you can see it's a different story. But Laozi, we don't know how does it come out, but we know they have a person and who know Confucius and who is older than Confucius. And they talk, okay, according to his historical account. They are not much disagree. They have a lot disagree. They have a lot of disagree on that. So they have a story of their communication. But whether or not the text we read today is the person who met Confucius, who wrote it, okay, we don't know. And very sure, I probably can say very sure, it's not possible, complete 100% by him to sit down and write all the 5,000 characters about this. I cannot believe this situation. Must have like some word left and the people compile together, probably over 100 years and put together. So I think that would be the background on that. And then I constantly talk about this one is teaching, okay, and to the ruler. I'm not saying the teacher stand there, the students sit there, and I tell you no. I think that he is writing his idea or some verbal, okay, they've been written down as an idea and compile. And I think all this time, most of people's mind probably think about how to deal with the current affair, which is a lot of war. The kingdom, they fight each other. I think probably that's in their mind. That's the problem they try to resolve. And that's why I come with a different idea. I hope I answer David's question on that.
Thank you very much. I have Sakit.
Am I audible?
Yes.
I'm sorry about that. I mistakenly clicked on edit.
That's okay.
So this is very interesting. Two things basically three things strike me while listening to different versions of this. One, and I'm talking about the essence of what strike to me. It's kind of when he starts with the skillful. He starts with somebody who is realized, who is established in Tao, and then he moved to an ordinary person, how an ordinary person is different. He actually make a comparison and how an ordinary person behave, and then he ends in that Tao again. So it's kind of a journey where he is pointing out an action of a Tao, which is non-action. Then he says an ordinary man has intentions, and that's what is different from that somebody who is established in Tao and has non-action with action without intention. And then he says the lowest point is the ritual, which is, I believe in modern psychology, is conditioning, where mindlessly repeating things and getting caught in the habit. And then he gives the key, the solution to that. And he ends with that last thing where he says that the person who is established in Tao has no will, an action without a will, an action without an intention. So I just want to ask this, what is that action which has no intention? And I just want to remain on that point, because this is what is essentially pointed out in this entire thing, an action without an intention. And that's the highest state of somebody who is established in Tao, which is what he has started and ended in. So my question is that, what is that action without will or without intention?
Yeah, that is actually something that I was wondering about myself, Sakit. Jason, would you like to expand on that?
Yeah, I think the Chinese words called 有以为 and 无以为. Okay, so intention probably the closest translation. I just can give an example, like when you, let's say if you see a beggar or somebody asks for money and you want to give the money, right? One way to do it is like, just in a very proper way, okay, to say, okay, this is the money, okay, please take it and do it. That's the so-called do it intention. You want to do it, okay, on purpose in the proper way. It's nothing wrong on that. 无以为 is something like, I have to quote Nietzsche, okay? Nietzsche talk about when the people are hungry, okay, not exactly word, but meaning is, I would rather let the person steal my food, okay, than give the food to that person. Because you give the food to a person, you double insult that person because he already hungry and he has to thank you and be humble, in front of you. And Nietzsche said, okay, he would rather have the people steal, they give the chance to let the people steal the food. I'm not sure this one is a proper example, but the difference between intention and unintention is kind of this kind of intention. It's also the difference between wu wei and wei, right? You're doing the no action and inaction. This kind of the subtle difference, and then it will take a while to figure out. That's why it take a long many chapters to talk about this one. So it's very similar. And I think somebody talked about Sartre. Okay, reading Sartre's Bad Face, okay, probably help. Okay, something like in between. Okay, it's not like you do it on purpose. Okay, but you do it like before you show your purpose. I think that's the thing. I hope Armand is here. He probably has a better words to explain here.
I think it's a good example actually, and I had a similar response, and that's where I was actually going with the idea of desire a little bit earlier. That if you're acting with intention, you're actually working against your desire, and so therefore that's the same process that I was looking for. So next I have Krishna. It's a difficult question though.
This is a bit piling on, but Ursula Le Guin has notes at the end of the book, and the notes for this particular chapter go like this. The series here is of familiar Confucian principles. Gen, Li, Yi. Good, humane, human-hearted, altruistic, Gen. Righteous, moral, ethical is Li. Laws, rights, rules, law and order is Yi. But Lao Tzu reverses and subverts the Confucian authorities. Chen Qi in the fourth verse is premature knowledge. In Charis and foreknowledge in Lao and Hendricks and Whaley, who explains it as part of Confucian doctrine. Hendricks interprets it as having more one's mind made up before one enters a new situation about what is right and wrong, and proper and acceptable, and so on. Prejudice, that is, or opinion, Buddhists and Taoists agree in having a very low opinion of opinion.
Thank you. And that's at the end of the Ursula Le Guin one that you were just mentioning, because
she has notes at the end of her book, as opposed
right.
to the end of the particular chapter. The end of the book has notes.
Okay, so at the end of the very end of the book. Okay, I was just wondering. Okay, thank you. And next up is Charlie, followed by Elena.
Yeah, this is getting into material that that is really new for me, and so I'm really fascinated with this. Okay, I would like to read a couple of sentences from the Dao De Jing translation by Roger Ames, And it's basically in agreement with what Jason was saying. This chapter joins the anti-Confucian polemic of chapters 18 and 19, in which there is a real concern that the Confucian celebration of increasingly artificial moral precepts will overwhelm the unmediated expression of natural feelings. It is for this reason the full arsenal of Confucian moral values comes under assault. To be fair to the early Confucian tradition, the Analects, the Mencius, and the recently recovered Confucian document, 5 Modes of Proper Conduct, all share this purportedly Taoist concern for moral authenticity as an uncontested value. And for me, one of my personal struggles has been the relationship between a personal philosophy as to how I choose to live my own life versus a social philosophy. And for me, social philosophy is one of the primary concerns, and maybe the only real concern for social philosophy, is the proper expression of power. And the thing is, okay, when you have a personal philosophy, then it's meaningful to yourself personally, because that's what a personal philosophy is. But the thing is that people are different. We're not all the same. Okay, so it's going to be pretty natural that different people are going to have different personal philosophies. Okay, so I think it's a big mistake to think one personal philosophy is going to fit everybody, because that's just not true. And so the question in social philosophy is like I said, one of the main concerns is the expression of power. What is a legitimate exercise of power? And I was not aware that Taoism really addressed that issue, but evidently quite clearly I'm wrong. The thing is like for instance in Buddhism, there's what's called Pure Land Buddhism, and Pure Land Buddhism is kind of a lot like Christianity. Okay, it's kind of like if you do the nice things and proper things, and it's kind of like this the virtue thing, and that you'll end up in the Pure Land heaven, and so that you'll be rewarded for your good behavior. And this is kind of similar to what's his name? Shoot. You see stages of moral progression. Colbert, yeah. Say again. Kohlberg. Moral. Kohlberg, right? And so this is kind of like a social philosophy. Marxism is another example of a social philosophy. It has to do with moral values that are first personal, and then we get to higher and higher levels of abstraction in terms of what is proper action of governments and so on. And so for me, this has always been a struggle with trying to understand Asian philosophy, because like I said, there's this accusation of quietism, and people just go off and live in a cave and meditate and all that type of stuff. And but the thing is that what do you have to say about society itself? Because people, one of the things that is common to almost everybody is that they want to have some semblance of order in society. That's a high value, and that's at Maslow's lowest level of hierarchy of needs. Is to be safe, and so this is so this verse is interesting to me. So I'm interested to see how it progresses, because for me, social philosophy and politics, political philosophy, it's really hard to disentangle them, to say, well, this is social. As soon as you grab onto one, you basically grabbed onto the other, and because politics is really about the expression of power, and so it's the problem that I have with Buddhism, for instance, is that it doesn't seem to talk about that at all. It's kind of like well, Thich Nhat Hanh says, well, we'll have engaged Buddhism, but what does he do? He just tells he really doesn't have any practical suggestions other than to be present, and to do your breathing exercises, and kind of that sort of a thing to become into a more ethical person. And I kind of get that feeling that that's what's kind of what Taoism is also saying, that it's kind of like a wishful thinking. Well, wouldn't it be nice if everybody were nice? And but if everybody had some kind of sense of enlightenment, but that's not going to happen. You know, that's not the reality. You know so. Anyway, so for me, this is a really difficult subject, and I am lost. Okay, to be perfectly honest, as to how to go about resolving this question. But I think it's a real question. I think it deserves to be addressed. Anyway, that's all I want to say.
I agree. And actually, Jason, do you want to respond? I mean, it is a deep question that he's asking.
Yeah, I think that's a skip. You know, it's a big question. You know,
It is really big.
Over the time, you know, and we will get there. But since I just like to quickly talk about intentional and unintentional. Another good example is think about bicycling or skiing, right? If you intentionally think about left foot, right foot push, you know, you cannot do it, right? Basically, you have unintentionally to do it. So that means you already own the skill. Then you can ski, you can bicycle, not you think about that step by step, something like that. That's another way to understand intentionally and unintentionally. Yeah. And then this text about intentionally, unintentionally, about the 3 Confucius teaching, especially like Ren, which is humaneness, and Yi, righteousness. These 2 words in Confucius text have been talked about hundreds of times. But here, I think to make it very clear what's the difference between Ren and Yi. One is intentional, one is unintentional. So I think that's, to me, I think it's a very good explanation, even help me understand Confucianism better.
Speaks to the importance of habit as well, I think, in a way, as far as virtue is concerned. But Elena.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going back to the same intention that this is something major, and I'm also looking into that. So one of the translations, I could just read 4 sentences.
Please.
And it's repeating what Jason was saying, just in different words. Therefore, when Tao is lost, there is goodness. When goodness is lost, there is kindness. When kindness is lost, there is justice. When justice is lost, there is ritual. Now, ritual is the husk of faith and loyalty and the beginning of confusion. Knowledge of the future is only a flowering trapping of the Tao. It's the beginning of folly. And this corresponds to truly what Jason was, what Jason presented in that table, comparison table. And so I started to put it down. So when Tao is gone, the very highest level, then goodness comes, and then kindness, and then justice, and then ritual. And question to Jason. So Jason, you say that the level of, let me go back to your table. At the level of humanness, Ren, and righteousness. So the difference is there is no intentionality when we're in the state of Ren, and then righteousness comes when we become acting intentionally. Could you please go there? Like what do you see there? What appears to you?
I just agree. That's what I feel, you know. So Confucius, of course, they have a different content for Ren and Yi, okay, and the Li. Li is simple, okay. That's some ritual we can. But Ren, okay, which is you call it goodness, and kindness, right? And Yi, your translation is justice, okay. Mm-hmm. You can feel, right, what's the difference, right? And one difference is Ren, you cannot do it with your intention. You got to through the training. That's why in the Confucius analog, there's a Confucius analog only has a 10,000 character, but in there have over 100 人. Okay, so you can see how important. And the Confucius never give a clear definition of what is 人. Okay, so 人 just can have to go through all kinds of training, and you only can act unintentionally. And the E is different. Example, E in common Chinese language would be, my friend has a difficulty, and according to E, okay, I have to help him. So there's no way you can do it unintentionally. But the 人, you can do it. That's the heart, your compassion, your kindness to people. So which you don't have to do it intentionally. You will show when you do everything, every word you speak, every way you act. Now that's my understanding.
Okay. Are there any other comments for this particular one? If not, then I'm going to go ahead and close the meetup. So I want to say thank you to Jason as well. Kevin, actually, do you have a question, or would you like to add something?
Yeah, if you don't mind, actually put the exclamation mark. For me, a couple things.
Oh, you did. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. For this one, Jason, use different things. You skillful and unskillful. Original is traditional way. Use we code. We identify, for example, virtue something practice. Above, middle, and under. It's normally like structure the things. Normally it's like one table, above, middle, under, kind of. Include here is so for the Dao, right? For the De, it's they're doing that structure. So that's one thing I'm going to mention. The different practice understand from Western perspective. A second one, by the way, this chapter 38, they just start a journey, obviously very practical way for daily life, close to Confucius. That's the second part of the book. And the first part is Dao. Dao, like I mean, Svenka mentioned that. Dao is like in the evening practice, relax for yourself internally. It's good for your house. But the De is a social community part of the thing. That's obviously complicated. The harder part is dealing with people and with relationship. That's the part. In this chapter, obviously mentioned lots of tradition in China. 仁义礼智信. Here, 智 and 信 didn't match much, but it's from focus there. It's a transition chapter. So we're going to lots of related kind of different interpretation. That's here interpretation. That's one thing is back to original. The third one, second one is based on the text. Let's say, or the text meaning. What's slowly change. Then the third one is from the current what we practice. If in China, there's lots of one tradition we already modified or not follow strictly like it used to be. And this fourth one, obviously, is our translation. How and take breath, like Jason do the good, the table, like I like that. Dao and is above the De and under the. I'm used to ideal skill, and the Ren Yi Li and humanness and righteous and righteous. And another is knowledge or knowing. And wisdom and trust. That's later on. This used to be still still even from government, from community, we still follow those core value. However, try use different wording. We learn it from President FC. It used to be no. It's like we follow that very clear those words. However, it makes different fantasy word still follow the similar. Thank you.
Thank you, Evan. Jason, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I'm fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Charlie, you're on mute.
I was clicking the red thing up by my picture rather than the one down at the bottom of the page. So, well, why is it not going off? Anyway, I want to just mention something that is an alternative way of looking at this that is modern, that I think is worthwhile considering. Okay, I mean, I'm not saying it's the right way to look at things. It's just an alternative possibility. There's been a lot of recent work done on the structure of the brain and how the brain works, and in particular lateralization, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. And the left hemisphere is very focused, very narrowly focused. Okay, and it's very good at things that are put in boxes. Okay, so that everything gets kind of categorized and put inside of a little box, and the whole universe is made up of a whole bunch of little boxes. Like, for instance, in physics, you have the idea of a particle, an elementary particle, and the whole universe is made up of these little elementary. There's only 6 of them, different kinds of quarks and stuff, and so the whole universe is made up of all these little particles. There's the other way of looking at it, and that is looking at it as the whole. Okay, and then drawing out of that whole parts that are relevant to your best of understanding that pertain to the situation that you're in at the particular moment. And this is more akin to like pragmatism of William James and John Dewey and so forth. But it's also, I think, very much related to Taoism. And one of the things that's most interesting to me is that the right side of the brain is where all of the social intelligence lies. Okay, in other words, what is proper behavior? So that in a sense, evolutionarily speaking, human beings have developed along a line where there is like an built-in. I mean, children have this. Little children have this ability to be able to tell the difference between good behavior and bad behavior, and so it's. And the right side of the brain is better at imagination things. The only emotion that really lateralizes to the left is anger. Okay, and so the left side is really into domination and control. And so this tendency to, for instance, want to get all legalistic and have things all written down, and these are the rules and regulations, and that's like putting people into little boxes and so on. And so that it could be, this is, like I said, this is a conjecture. I'm not saying this is the right way to think of it. I'm just saying this is a possible way to look at it. That Asian philosophy may have developed with an inclination to be more right brain dominant. And in fact, there's a very interesting fact that I just found out about a couple of weeks ago. There's a genetic variant called the serotonin promoter gene, where people they're highly sensitive people, okay, and that they are deep thinkers, that they're very sensitive to emotional situations and so on. And what's interesting is that the incidence of those kind of people are 4 or 5 times higher in Asian societies than they are in Western societies. And there's a publication that came out of China, by the way, that is positing the possibility that maybe the reason for that there's so many more in Asian cultures than there are in Western cultures is that there was an accommodation of the culture to those people, and because there was an accommodation to those people, the number of them increased. Okay, because the environment was more propitious for them. And anyway, this is something that I think that the kind of a coming together of Western and Eastern philosophy, that this idea that there is physical matter that interacts with how people behave and how they believe, and all that type of stuff. And so it was just something I thought I would throw out there.
No, it's an excellent point. I mean, the idea that we have a tendency to institute a set of rules, and how that works with essentially the left hemisphere of our brain, and that this is more towards the idea of living through nature and not naming things. That's actually, from a neurological perspective, it's an interesting point that I had not yet considered, especially the idea when you think about things like legalism and how it developed as well within the context of that you were just talking about. But yes, when you start to name things, and you just as the idea of ritual is the husk of faith and loyalty, the beginning of confusion. To me, there's something to that, in the sense that you are all of a sudden you're not acting in accordance with nature anymore. You're acting in accordance with laws, and laws require names, and they require structures, which is very left brain, as you had pointed out. And I never thought about it from that perspective. So I very much appreciate you bringing that up. Margarita.
Yes, just short. I know we run out of time.
No, take your time.
I read this translation by Stefan Stunut here, and he said that this second part is actually talking more about but the highest just like Jason said, is actually deviating from the Dao, which we often talk about in our first part. So I think it will be interesting, maybe for the next chapters. Maybe. Thank you so much, Jason and Kevin and Amon, for giving the translation. But for me, like I'm a beginner learner, it will be great if you can tell us, describe a bit how this virtue can be developed, but deviating from the way, because I thought the way is something that we need to understand and it should come naturally. But how come this highest virtue should deviating from that? That's still a bit puzzling for me. I do recall what Charlie mentioned, and maybe what Jason said. This is not for common people, because also in Lawrence Kohlberg, it says that people who can reach that highest morality is just few people, like Jesus, Mahatma Gandhi, while the rest of us is just a lower human morality that we can obtain. So is that what we're going now? When we learn about Dao De Jing, that this is the ideal, but we can never really obtain that thing. So yeah, maybe that's something that we can discuss further. Thanks.
The idea of the sage, almost, in a way. Yeah, I mean, the sage is spoken about in the Tao as well. But Jason, would you like to do you have any reply?
Yeah, I think that okay, Dao De Jing is not that well structured. Okay, so it's just roughly put this way. So if you expect seeing a lot of the, you're probably disappointed. And the rest part, probably a lot of mystic thing coming out. So
right.
Maybe disappointed. Okay, and they get longer. And some got a little mystical, and that's why the religious Tao about to follow on that. And I like to call, when you talk about the deviation, I don't see that. I call it the trinity of the Tao. So basically, it's the Tao. They have the De, which is virtual. Another is name. Okay, so that's the three things. They all get together. So I call it the trinity of the Tao. So basically, they're just like a Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. So they all go together, but the three person, but in one view. You can see in this way. So that's the only thing I like to say. Yeah.
Interesting, Elena.
About the sage. Okay, I think the sage.
Oh yeah, please go ahead.
Sage here is a little bit different. Okay, here constantly show sage, and this one is not. I'm talking. This is the political sage. Okay, I think all of them here talk about sage is a political ancient sage, which is a political kid, political figure, and then that's why I always think this one is a political teaching, because they mention the political sage, and then this kind of like we can be sage, this kind of concept, it did not come out until later, about 1,000 years later in China. So I don't see the teacher expect you become the sage. It's just say this is the sage. Okay, I think that's a little bit different, but it's a subtle difference. And we are modern people. We don't have father. We can say I act like sage, so that's fine.
Thank you. Elena.
Okay, so going back to what Jason said, the Trinity, Jason, so you said a Trinity of Dao, Wu Wei, as whatever the characteristics, if there are any characteristics of what it is. And then there, when you say there, how could you describe it in words? And what's the third component of the Trinity? That's my question.
You're muted.
Yeah, I call it the Dao, right? And the De, which is virtue, and the name, which is Ming. Okay, if you recall the first section, right? Dao Ke Dao Fei, and the name can be named. Okay, so that's just I call it. No reference. I just name it. Okay, so I use as an example. That's not in the common academic discussion. And I probably, my translation is, I find out a lot of the translation is kind of like when I read something and then that's the lesson I learned and they write it. Okay, the way I try to do it is just let the text show what it is. And then when you see it, you read it, you have your own lesson on that. Instead of I read it and I learn the lesson and I write down my lesson. No, I'm not doing this way. And I go back to because of this meetup, I go back to look at another Chinese ancient interpreter. Okay, then I find out all the people, they are doing the same way as today's English translator. They read it, they learn something, they write it down. There's very few or almost none. They write down like what it is mean, So I think that's my translation always have something different than other translations.
And another thing, Li as rituals, we would think Li is the meaning of Li could be water, the flow, and such. So it's like Li in paintings could be all this flowing body of water.
Elena, I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you. I think that you misunderstand two words. Okay, they all call Li. Okay, but one is Li. Both pronounced the same, exactly the same. But the one I hear, ritual, is Li. That's Confucius talking about. Another Li we can translate as a principle. Okay, that's like water. That's the rule. This concept doesn't show up until near Confucius. That's the 10th century. So that's Li, two Li. Okay, Confucius talk about Li is ritual. Another Li is kind of like a principle. This kind of Li. That's two things.
Okay.
Kevin.
Yes, thank you. That's try. Hopefully still remember Margaret the question about Dao. It's normally Dao with prefix or suffix in Chinese is so lost everywhere, from the body, like we call it smell Dao, and the taste Dao, and the way, like we call the road, we call the Dao, road avenue, and this is one side physically we kind of visible, and you can hear some or smell it. The Dao self, another virtual feel like metaphysical. That's the Dao. We talk about Dao De Jing. That part, it's about the internal law of the universe, or we in Chinese from Kunzi's side time. I didn't do deep research for that. They say the Dao already is kind of lost. It's like we see it in the lost the Western or kind of lost the cause. That's kind of similar thing. So that's even this chapter 38. It keeps saying, let's see, Dao. If the upper Dao is above Dao is not there, so use a lower Dao, or unskilled use if you use a Jason translation. So then slowly down, then the step by step we backward. Basically, we try regulate ourselves. Then how to communicate, work with others. That's one thing I feel sad. Another thing, feel let's Dao is so utopian. But that's a standard. That's supposed to be. If I'm doing something good to you, Jules, I don't need to let you know. Because that's good for my, I didn't know unintentionally do it. That's used to be. If it's not like now, let's see, do something good or show off. That's normal competition. It is everything opposite. But it is good, obviously, thinking, let's see, what we believe to be doing, pursuit to wealth, opposite also true. For example, they one idiom called 哀贫乐道. It's like I'm happy with I'm poor because I have Dao.
I'm sorry, could you say that again? I didn't get that. I'm happy.
How to be poor.
Okay.
Yeah. And happy with Dao.
Okay.
So it's a lot, obviously it's happy because inside in Buddhism, Hindi, yoga, you think inside happiness. You see the Dao, they see you from people's the facial, you cannot look at it, so calm. So you see monk, typical like a monk, like those, for example, yeah. I'm going to pause here. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for adding those comments in there. I mean, this one is actually seemingly one of the most deep, and actually could have been one of it. Could have been an entire meetup onto itself. But yes. So, Jason, do you have any closing remarks?
Well, thank you, everybody. I think that's great. That's my pleasure to have a chance to talk my idea. And then I always mention, actually, I learned a lot from everybody's question, because I find out I know it inside, and right now I jump out and then I see a lot of questions, and I can know from outside. So that's a great experience to me. Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Yeah, this was actually a wonderful session for myself. I was actually pretty busy taking notes, and I learned quite a bit. And the way you outlined verse 38 was very, very helpful. And that's in the Google Docs on your website, correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I can access that whenever.
Yeah, I defend the copyright, so just do whatever you want to do.
Thank you. No, thank you very, very much for that. Folks, I'll just do a quick announcement on what is upcoming. Tomorrow is why is Harry Potter series so popular? 4 houses and more, and that's a Comprehensivist Wednesday topic, and that is being led by Evanique. And then at Thursday, and this is at 7 p.m., the future of leadership in the digital age with Jeff Nugent. That is actually an excellent series. I really enjoy it thoroughly, and I actually work with Jeff on that series, and I think that particular meetup is actually going to be very interesting. It kind of builds on our other meetups with the Center for the Study of Digital Life, which we've been having on Sundays, which are also very, very good at 3 o'clock on Sundays, if you can join us. Then Thursday, it's deep conversation with those of you that may be reading The Design Way with us. I see a couple of you in the audience that are more than a couple that are reading The Design Way with us, and that'll be Thursday at 9 o'clock. And then Friday, we have Enjoying Solitude, Other People at Flow and Flow. It's the book Flow, chapter 8. And that's being led by Maritza. And that is Friday at 7 o'clock. And 9 o'clock Friday is the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verses 35 through 51, and chapter 2. And that'll be on Friday. And that's actually been a very, very interesting series. So we have a lot of great things coming up. And then Jason, you have your meetup on Saturday, correct?
Yeah, Saturday, 1 o'clock or 4 o'clock.
4 o'clock, yeah. And then what are we covering this week?
This week with Islamic philosophy. So
cool.
I invite Dr. Shelby, okay, from Chicago, and he's going to have our first talk about Islamic philosophy. I believe most of people probably not familiar, so I think let's give it a try and see what's going on.
Yeah, I enjoy those Saturday meetups quite a bit. I've learned quite a bit. Even tonight's references when we were talking about legalism, I remember all my lessons from your meetup. Thank you, everyone. It's been a wonderful evening. I really appreciate everybody's input. Charlie, I really like the right brain, left brain, looking at the Dao from a different perspective. And it's been a wonderful evening, and I'll see everyone soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Okay,
You
bye.
too.